Thanksgiving's coming up, and here's one group with a lot to give thanks for: all those in any way connected with this country's detention and torture practices. With the release of George W.'s self-incriminating book, accountability seems farther than ever. And since Bush's book, there's been an almost constant flow of no-fault admissions. Most recently from Bush Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. What does any of it mean for detainees, for justice, and for the new Congress? Vince Warren, Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights and our Constitutional Rights correspondent, joins me next.
Part of the job of being a lawyer is defending sometimes unpopular decisions that your clients make. And I'm willing to do that part of the job. And I mean, just because the law says you can drive 65 miles an hour doesn't mean you have to drive 65 miles an hour. There's still a lot of discretion and choice that the elected leaders of our government had to make. And I'm prepared and confident in saying that I think my legal judgment then was right under the circumstances. But that doesn't mean that that the President Bush and everyone else had to choose a policy they did either.
Vince, welcome back to the program. Explain to me if I'm getting this right. It seems to me there were midterm elections, a new Congress elected in the House, and suddenly this flow of folks like you, most recently you, coming out saying, yeah, we tortured, it wasn't so bad, and it was legal.
Isn't that something? It seems like the floodgates have opened for torture apologists, and everybody's coming out of the woodwork saying, me too, me too.
Is it connected to the electoral results? Is it coincidence?
It's completely connected. One of the big fights that we've been having in the first part of the Obama administration has been the question of accountability. What is the Obama administration going to do with the facts about torture? What are the legal steps that they're going to take? After the midterms have swung forward, it's clear that the House has changed hands. And so now the Republicans and the right wing are coming out because they feel like there's not going to really be any way for them to be held accountable with this new crop of folks that we have in Congress.
And what's in it for them, though, to come forward so forthrightly? It wasn't as if anybody was really snapping at their heels.
Well, you know, what would have been great is if the Obama administration had actually moved forward resolutely with some criminal prosecutions here, because actually what you'd be hearing are people taking the fifth rather than coming out saying, me too, me too. One person had said to me that actually George Bush doesn't belong on television, he belongs in The Hague. And frankly, most of these guys do, but the reason why they're on television now is because there's really no movement for accountability in Congress or in the Obama administration. Now,
it looks like there aren't going to be cases brought in the UK either. And in fact, there were settlements, pre-trial compensation promised to torture victims. It was announced recently but didn't get a lot of play. Here's a clip of a news report from Sky News.
Well, here's what we know about the payments. Around a dozen former prisoners will be granted out-of-court settlements following weeks of negotiations between lawyers. They are all British citizens or residents of the UK, and among them are Binyam Mohammed, Mozam Beg and Martin Mubanga. The government faces allegations it colluded in the torture of detainees whilst they were held abroad, and it's also alleged it failed to prevent them going to Guantanamo Bay illegally.
Now, I've spoken to 2 out of 3 of those there, named in these payments. They've got outrageous stories to tell about their experiences in Guantanamo. Where do you stand on these payments coming out of the British? Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing because there won't be court trials?
Well, ultimately, what we're looking for is accountability for torture, and compensation is one form of accountability, and let's be clear, it's a form of accountability that certainly the rest of the men in Guantanamo don't seem to be getting.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good thing that, number one, that lawsuits were brought initially that pushed the British government into this position where they really had to reckon with the fact that they needed to compensate people for torture. But I think there's an interesting piece, which is that not all of the people that are entitled to settlement are actually out in the world. One of them, Sheikh Ammar, is still in Guantanamo, which raises the question of what is the British government going to do with respect to the Obama administration to get him released.
Now, can the UK admit guilt for having colluded without incriminating the United States, or without opening the door for criminal charges here?
Well, they shouldn't be able to, and I think they'll probably try to walk that line as best that they can. But let's remember, in the Binyam Mohammed case, one of the judges, a UK judge, said that the Bush administration engaged in cruel, unusual, and degrading treatment, which amounts to torture. That is a fact in the British legal system. So when the British intelligence folks say, yes, we colluded with that, or we will settle these claims, it really does point to the fact what they colluded in was torture that was initiated by the U.S. government. It's got to point to some measure of accountability here in the United States.
Now, torture came up in the Gailani trial. We've talked about it a little bit on this program, but since the verdict came down, I wanted to check with you. A guy was charged of over 200 counts of terrorism for connection with the embassy bombings in Africa in '98, and he was found not guilty of almost all charges, partly because some of the evidence was related or came from witnesses who claimed they'd been tortured.
Right.
That didn't come out in much of the public discussion.
No, it really didn't. The public discussion seems to be now whether U.S. courts or the federal courts are the way to go, or whether they should be military commissions. The problem is that the court system, the federal court system, is not the problem. Torture is the problem. And we saw that in the Gailani case, where there was a witness who claimed that he sold Gailani TNT to blow up these embassies. That information and evidence was kept out because the officials only found out about that after Gailani was tortured, after he was in a CIA black site. So at the end of the day, it's the right-wing Bush administration that tied its own hands behind its back, and now the right-wing media folks are out there trying to reinvent the rules of fairness in order to account for that.
Well, and here's an example. Newt Gingrich talking about this case this week. Take a look.
This is a fight over a war, and you can't bring into this kind of trial the kind of evidence that a military tribunal would have. And the federal judge was wrong, and the Attorney General was wrong to take it there. So I think Attorney General Holder should resign, and I think the American people should rightly feel that they are more endangered as long as Holder is the Attorney General.
So to go back to the politics of this for a minute, what is the significance of this new heat under Eric Holder, for example, as the new Congress meets? What does it mean for the Justice Department for justice?
Well, I think what you're going to expect to see are a number of people that are coming to Congress that are hot under the collar about trials. And they're going to take two positions. One is that nobody in Guantanamo should get trials. And when that doesn't play, they're going to say, well, they should get trials, but they should be in these fake military commissions that were set up that we all know don't work. The big problem here is that there's a lack of reason. Nobody's thinking. Newt Gingrich is the person that's wrong here. Actually, it's not Obama and it's not Eric Holder. And in fact, if you looked at the Gailani case and the torture evidence that was excluded, that evidence would likely have been excluded under military commissions as well. So really saying that he got convicted out of 1 out of 285 charges is really not the focus. The point of this is that if you want fairness, you need to do it in a court that's set up for fairness. And that's the best that we have.
Unfortunately, it's not just people from the right who are making some of these arguments. Here's Hillary Clinton with a disturbing sentence. I'm sure you'll spot it. Take a look.
We do believe that what are called Article 3 trials, in other words, in our civilian courts, are appropriate for the vast majority of detainees. There are some for whom it is not appropriate. You will get no argument from this administration on that point.
So the implication, it was almost the unsaid sentence, is, well, what does that mean? If the cases aren't fit to be brought to trial, is that permanent detention we're talking about?
Well, I think the Obama administration is really talking out of both sides of their mouth here. What they want to do is they want to use the cases in federal courts where they're assured to win, and then for cases that they don't know whether they're going to win or they have problems, they just want to hold these guys indefinitely. And the big problem is the Constitution. I'm always on your show talking about the Constitution, but that's really what is the main issue here. You cannot have people indefinitely detained simply because you don't think you're going to get a conviction, because the evidence that was obtained from them was obtained through torture.
I thought we had a whole lot of new Congress people elected precisely on restoring the Constitution.
One would think, and the question is, what do the big government, the small government Republicans think about the big government that is being moved forward here by keeping people detained outside of the rule of law? It's insane.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to find out. Vince Warren, I hope you'll be with us on the journey. Thanks so much.
Thank you.